What we know so far is that the soul is the principle of life, and that according to Aristotle, this principle of life, the soul, is the form of any living thing. The form of a living thing is its soul. Now, at this point, you might think, or you might ask of Aristotle, you know, tell us a little bit more there. Tell us a little bit more about this soul. And Aristotle would say, okay, gladly. There are three kinds of soul. So this is Aristotle getting more specific about the nature of the soul. And in claiming that there are three kinds of soul, what he's really kind of saying is that there are three different kinds of basic life activity. Three different ways in which things can be alive and in which they express their life. To put it that way, that's not how Aristotle puts it, but that's another way to think about it. Three kinds of basic life activity. That's Aristotle's idea. That's what these three kinds of soul are. Okay, so what are they? First, nutrition and growth, which he sometimes, and I will sometimes call the nutritive soul. Second, perception. That's another. So nutrition and growth is a basic life activity. It's a kind of life activity, as is perception. And I will sometimes call, and Aristotle sometimes calls perception, or this part of the soul, the perceptive soul. And lastly, the third kind of basic life activity is thinking, rational thought. And Aristotle will sometimes call this the mind. He'll sometimes call it the intellect. He'll sometimes call it the rational soul. He's referring to the same thing by all these different phrases, right? Thinking, the rational soul, the mind, the intellect, all this kind of goes together. It's referring to this third kind of soul. So let's go through them in order in a bit more detail now. So nutrition and growth. What exactly is the nutritive soul? What does he have in mind here? What Aristotle's idea is, well, look, there are, anything that's alive has a soul, and the life of certain organisms consists merely in nutrition and growth. They take in nutrients, they, do things with them, they rearrange them in certain ways, they digest them, if you will, and they do that in order to regenerate cells, in order to grow new things, in order to reproduce, right? Nutrition and growth, the nutritive soul, then includes all those kinds of activities: digestion, cell regeneration, and reproduction. You can think of reproduction as, in a sense, as a kind of growth, right? You're growing another instance of your kind. The nutritive soul is responsible for those kinds of activities. In Aristotle's view, and this seems rather plausible if you think about it, right? Everything that's alive, or just about everything that's alive, we'll see one exception in a little bit. All plants and animals have a soul of that kind, right? The fern does, the oak tree does, right? Because think about plants. They take in nutrients from the soil, and then I don't know how it works, but they do things with those nutrients, and then they grow leaves, and then they grow fruit, and then they drop the fruit, and that's reproduction and blah blah blah, whatever, right? Nutrition and growth, plants do that, and then obviously animals do that, right? Tigers go and eat, I don't know what tigers eat. Panda bears? I have no idea what tigers eat. Right? They go eat whatever they eat, and digestion, they regenerate, and they obviously reproduce and so on. Human beings too, right? Human beings have a nutritive part of their soul. They engage in nutrition and growth. Anything that here in this world that's alive engages in these kinds of activities, right? And so this is like a basic marker of life, right? Nutrition and growth. And really, according to Aristotle, this is going to be what really kind of primarily distinguishes living things from non-living things. Rocks don't do this. They don't nourish themselves, nor do they grow in this particular way. I mean, maybe they grow in a kind of other way, but it's not internal to it. It's not internally directed growth. It's externally directed growth. So that's the first kind of soul. In Aristotle's view, that's the entirety of a plant's soul. That's all that plants do. All they do is nourish themselves and grow and reproduce and so on. That's the only kind of soul that they have. But animals, they do other things. Animals have senses. And this, according to Aristotle, is what distinguishes animals from plants. Plants only nourish themselves and grow. Animals have sensation or perception. Now, not every animal has all five senses, according to Aristotle. Some animals, the most basic sense, according to Aristotle, is touch. And so he thinks that some animals only have touch. I think he said like mollusks or clams. I think he says only have touch. I can't remember his exact examples, right? But they don't have eyes or noses or anything like that, right? They don't engage in these other sense modalities. And so, but any kind of perception at all qualifies you as an animal. And so animals have both a nutritive soul and a perceptive soul, according to Aristotle. And in his view, we don't need to worry about it so much, but what comes with the perceptive soul, with even, the most rudimentary kind of touch, are sensations of pleasure and pain. According to Aristotle, that's how touch works, or that's one of the things that kind of comes along with the sense of touch is pleasure and pain. And then obviously when you get other senses too, they have their own kinds of pleasure and pain associated with them. And so essential to perception is feeling pleasure and pain. And so along with the perceptive soul, what the perceptive soul also does is, in addition to allowing us to see and to taste and so on, is it allows us to experience pain or pleasure. And then also in Aristotle's view, the emotions or passions, as he will call them, those are just particular kinds of pleasure and pain. And so along with the perceptive soul comes the feeling of emotions and appetites and desires and fear and sadness and whatever, all the other, right? The emotions also come from this perceptive part of the soul, these appetitive, and so sometimes he'll call the perceptive part of the soul the appetitive part of the soul. It's the part of the soul where your appetites and desires and emotions come from. He'll sometimes call it the appetitive part of the soul. He'll sometimes call it the perceptive part of the soul. But that's this second kind of basic life activity. Animals do this, plants don't. And he also lumps in locomotion, right? Being able to move from place to place, something like that. That comes with this part of the soul as well. Only animals have this kind of soul, plants don't, right? Okay, fine. Lastly, we have thinking. And what Aristotle has in mind really here is something like being able to use concepts. And in his view, only rational beings have this kind of soul. Plants don't. Plants don't have concepts. They don't think in terms of concepts. And indeed, animals, non-human animals, he would say, don't have this either. They don't think in terms of concepts. He is not denying that animals, non-human animals, might have some kind of cognitive life. And indeed, he seems to be committed to saying that they do. They have emotions, they have desires, they have appetites, right? Lions can get angry and sloths can get frightened or whatever, right? That's possible. But what distinguishes human beings from those other kinds of animals is that human beings can kind of think about their experience. And indeed, their very experience itself is informed with concepts. We think about things by having certain concepts that we categorize them under. Other animals, Aristotle would want to say, don't have concepts like that. They don't categorize things under certain concepts. That's Aristotle's view, at least. Recent scientific research suggests that that might not be true, that certain animals might indeed have something like concepts. I think people have said dolphins, obviously, people think, but also I think even to a greater degree, orca whales seem to have a kind of language. So Aristotle obviously didn't know about that. And maybe certain kinds of other primates, chimpanzees or whatever, they might seem to be able to understand language in certain ways. I think Aristotle would say if it turns out that they can actually use concepts, which the science suggests they can, well, then, yeah, maybe they have a kind of rudimentary rational soul. They don't, however, Aristotle would insist, they don't have a rational soul in any way, in the same way that we do, I think is what he'd probably say. Their rational soul is not as developed, not as strong, more rudimentary or something like that, because human beings, it's really quite remarkable. Everything for human beings is processed through concepts, right? This kind of thinking, rational part of our soul just utterly dominates our lives and activities. And so, what he would want to say, and so the thinking is really what kind of distinguishes human beings from cows and tigers and so on. That's not to say human beings don't perceive, nor is it to say human beings don't nourish themselves and grow. And so for Aristotle, human beings have all three kinds of soul. Human beings have a rational soul, a perceptive soul, and nutritive soul. Or as he'll often talk about it, they have three parts to their soul. They have the nutritive part, the perceptive part, and the rational part of their soul. That's how Aristotle talks about it. Whereas a cow, a cow soul only has two parts. It has the nutritive part and the perceptive part. Human beings, they're strange. They have three parts to their soul. They have the nutritive, perceptive, and rational part. One last thing I want to mention about these three parts. Aristotle, as he's kind of going through these three parts, goes through, he raises the question of whether or not they are separable from the body. Right. So that's, and what you can kind of think of him thinking through here is some of the stuff that Plato had suggested at the very end of the Gorgias. At the very end of the Gorgias, Plato had given this myth of the afterlife where where the soul separates from the body and goes off into the afterlife or something like that. Is that actually possible? Could that possibly happen? If the soul is just like the form of some matter or something like that, could it exist in separation from the body of which it's the form? Could the shape exist in separation from the thing of which it is the shape? At this point, Aristotle doesn't answer that. What he suggests, however, is what will eventually be his answer. He says something like, it looks like the first two kinds of soul, nutrition and growth and perception, are inseparable from the body. They can't be separated from the body. They simply are the arrangement or organization of certain parts of the body, and so can't be separated from them. But what he suggests, and we're going to look at this in more detail as we proceed. Why exactly would he think that? How exactly does that work? That's what we're going to look at next. But he suggests thinking that might be separable from the body. Who knows? We don't know quite yet, but maybe if the soul is at all separable from the body, it's going to be that thinking part. That's what Aristotle says at this point. Who knows whether it is? I don't know. We got to talk more about it later on. And that's, again, what Aristotle is going to go on to do. And so one of the questions that's really going to kind of exercise him throughout the rest of the De Anima is whether or which parts and whether or not these parts of the soul are separable from the body. Can they exist in separation from the body? Or do they cease to exist as soon as the body does? Something like that. And so we'll see what his answers to those questions are as we proceed.